this USD seminar. It's a pleasure to welcome Dr. Martha Palmer today. She is Associate Professor of Computer and Information Science at the University of Pennsylvania. She started her academic career, I suppose, with a bachelor's count. The bachelor's and master's at the University of Texas, and then she got a PhD from Edinburgh University in '85. She worked for a while with the Unisys Corporation, and since '93 she has been at the IRCS, Institute for Research in Cognitive Science. Nothing to do with Red Cross and then since July last year, she's an associate professor in the CIS department. Her research interests include artificial intelligence, lexical semantics, I guess machine translation. So this is the overlapping area of machine translation and AI. And today she's going to talk to us about sense tagging in TreeBank.
Thank you. Thank you, Sanjeev.
Already you're breaking our agreement.
But when I talk, I'll stand there. Yes, so you now all know what IRC stands for. So you belong to this very special elite group that you can now tell people that it's the Institute for Research in Cognitive Science. I'm going to just say a little bit about the sort of general approach to natural language processing that we have at Penn, which relies on lexically based linguistic analysis. So basically we get humans to annotate naturally occurring text and then hand correct the output, which we do by having them hand correct the output of automatic parsers. So the Penn TreeBank originally was parsed by FIDIC, and there's some tree adjoining grammar corpus that was parsed by the XTAG parser, and then linguistic students did the hand correction. And then we trained statistical part-of-speech taggers and parsers and so on, and I think most of you have had experience with some of these components, so you don't need me to say anything more about them. There's a common thread in both the tree adjoining grammar parsers that are trained this way and the other stochastic parsers like the Collins parser and the Ratnaparky parser, which is the reliance on predicate argument structure, on getting the dependencies between the words. And that's something that I'm going to be talking about a lot. So our hypothesis is that the more linguistically sophisticated our analyzers are, the more accurate their output will be. And our goal is to prepare annotated corpora that is increasingly more and more linguistically sophisticated. So this is just some of the projects which I think you're already familiar with. What we're trying to do now, and this is partially under the DARPA TIDES funding, is to provide further enrichments to our annotations that include information about semantics and pragmatics, and also provide companion lexicons for the words in the annotated corpora, and to extend this approach to other languages such as Chinese and Korean. Our hypothesis is that if we have parallel annotated corpora with the same kind of predicate argument structure annotation that's currently in the Penn TreeBank and with even additional information as well, that this will be very useful for the rapid ramp up of machine translation. So what I'm going to do right now, and since this is a very late time for talks, I'll try not to make anybody work too hard. And I'll talk first about some of the issues in lexical choice in machine translation and why this predicate argument structure is so important, and what some of the constraints on these choices are, both at the word level and also at the class level. And I'll talk about something we're working on at Penn called VerbNet, which is sort of an extension of WordNet. I'll then show how we can use the entries in VerbNet to do the sense tagging of the Penn TreeBank, which is something that we're currently working on. And then if I have time at the end, say something about the Korean TreeBank and the Chinese TreeBank that we're working on as well. So we'll start with the lexical choice. Again, I sort of think I'm preaching to the choir here. I'm sure you're all very well aware of how important it is to get the right sense when you're doing a translation from one language to another. So for instance, when you're translating from English to Korean, when you translate Iraq lost the battle, you use a different expression for the verb, the Korean's verb final, than you use when you translate John lost his computer. So this is sort of losing as in losing a competition, and this is losing as in misplacing some kind of physical object. If you don't do that right, if you do the wrong translation of lose, you'll end up saying something like, Iraq misplaced the battle, which is maybe not exactly what you want to produce. It's also very important to get the right sense for cross-linguistic information retrieval. If you're just looking at doing English retrieval, you can put in something like speed of light and get back articles on plea bargaining. Because, of course, plea bargaining leads to speedier trials and lighter sentences, and here's speed and here's light if your system is sophisticated enough to do stemming in very close proximity to each other. But, obviously, this is not at all the sense of light that was intended in the query. This gets just that much worse when you're doing cross-linguistic information retrieval. This is saisie stupéfiant, which in French is drug seizure. And this was done by the people at Xerox Grenoble, and they have a bilingual dictionary, English-French dictionary, which they use to produce all the possible translations of saisie and stupéfiant, and then they run it through filters of word co-occurrence patterns for French and for English, but they still come up with all the following possible translations, which, and obviously this is the only one that you're really interested in. There's another sense of seizing, which is to physically grasp something, and there's another sense of seizing, which is to understand. Okay, but neither one of those would be considered appropriate translations. So just to make sure that we all understand the same thing with respect to predicate argument structures, I want to say just very quickly, so for the lose as in misplace something, the idea is that you have something which you might want to call the agent, which is animate and will be likely to be the subject of the sentence, and then the object is going to be something you might want to call the patient. It's going to be a physical object. For the other sense, you've got, again, an animate agent, and this time the thing that's being lost is maybe something like a competition. And you can get this information from a dictionary, or you can get it from word co-occurrence patterns. In fact, if we're using WordNet, there's a sort of physical object superclass you can use, and then there's a hostile military engagement, which is one type of competition, and then there's a sort of game, which is another type. So you'd kind of want the disjunction of those in order to give you your competition. And then you can also think of this as just sort of a tree structure with the verb as the root and the subject and the object as depending from the root, and both of these would share the same predicate argument structure. So again, you can use these kinds of semantic class constraints to recognize that in English you've got lose one, which is the losing the battle kind of thing, or you have lose two, which is misplacing an object, and then that can tell you which translation you're supposed to get. You can do similar things when you want to make a distinction in another language which you might not care about making in English. And rather than having to build an English dictionary that makes every single possible sense distinction that any language can make, you'd want to keep those sense distinctions in the target language. So for instance, in Korean, if you receive, if somebody hands you a book, okay, so you receive a physical object, that's going to be one particular translation. If you receive a communication, like a phone call, that's going to be a different expression. If you look at an English dictionary, we don't really make that kind of distinction, although maybe we should, because when you receive the book actually changes possession, and the person who had the book in the first place no longer has it. When you receive a communication, it's not like the person who communicated with you no longer has that information. So there really is a difference. But at any rate, if it's not made in the English lexicon, you can just have that word map onto a set of words, and then you can make the distinction in your target language by using the same kind of selectional restriction information. And whatever the object is, will select one of these expressions as being the appropriate one. You also have problems when you're translating from one language to another, and there just is no similar word in the other language. There's sort of a lexical gap. One example of this that people are very familiar with is wear, when you translate wear into Japanese. And in English, you know, I wear a jacket, I wear trousers, I wear shoes, I wear a belt, I wear a hat. It's all the same word. Japanese has different expressions for, I think, for each one of those, although I'm not positive about that. So there's sort of, we just don't have those same kinds of fine-grained distinctions in English. You get the same kind of thing when you translate English break into Chinese. We took the Brown corpus and found all the sentences that had break as the main verb, and there were, I don't know, 400 and something, and we threw out the sort of idiomatic things like breaking waves and the verb particle constructions, and we were left with about 250 sentences that were all almost either transitive or intransitive that had break as the main verb, and we had them translated into Chinese by a couple of different translators and got 68 different translations for this one word. And it's because in English, breaking is something that's very vague. It's very general. It tells you that this, whatever the object is, undergoes some sort of change of state. It's either separated into pieces or becomes dysfunctional. But it doesn't say anything specific about what the pieces look like or how that change of state occurred, what caused it. So in Chinese, what you find are compound expressions that make explicit both the cause and also the kind of result. So da po tells you that there was some sort of hitting action, and that the result is that this thing is now in large, irregularly shaped pieces. Da sui tells you that it's now in lots of small pieces. Da fen sui tells you it's in many, many, many small pieces. And then this, which I won't even try to pronounce, tells you is like snapping a stick, where you start with something shaped like a line segment and you end up with pieces that are also shaped like line segments. So you're getting a lot more information. Is this, or do I have some Chinese speakers in the audience who, is this more or less? Yeah. So you're getting a lot more information in Chinese, but it makes it difficult to do the translation if all you've got to start off with is break in English. So again, one of the ways you can do this is you've got really a whole group of verbs which are similar in English. They're not exactly synonyms, but they, in fact, these English words tend to be more precise than just break. And these can translate into a whole set of terms in Chinese. And again, you're going to have to let your argument of the verb tell you which one of these is going to be the most appropriate translation. And this gets really, if you tried to do this with actual reasoning, it would get pretty complicated, because you'd have to sort of do something about what kind of material substance the thing is made out of. So again, you might want to use some kind of corpus search to tell you what the typical arguments of these particular expressions are. We didn't use this information in order to do that translation, but this was something we observed kind of coincidentally, that if you look at the verb classes that Beth Levine has defined in her book, you'll find that the break verb class includes almost all of these expressions that we found as possible translations for break into Chinese. And in fact, that's because this class, this is a very semantically homogeneous class. And all of these verbs share the property of being change of state verbs. And they just differ in either, like snapping is certainly a different action. And there's certainly a difference in the shape of the resulting pieces. Tearing is a different kind of action. Splitting is a different kind of action. They really differ along the same dimensions that the Chinese expressions differ along. We were interested in the Levine classes anyway. This made us even more interested in them. And we immediately started wondering about whether or not we could use them for translation. It's often the case when you take, like we've used Dan Malamud's alignment algorithm and looked at the Hansards and looked at things like translating motion verbs into into English motion verbs into French motion verbs. And what you often end up with is sets of verbs into sets of verbs. It's not, you don't get a sort of one-to-one correspondence, but you'll get, a few verbs that are semantically similar that can translate into any one of a few other verbs in the other language that are also semantically similar. We were also just interested in these Levine classes. Well, let me tell you some more about the Levine classes. and what they are. There are about 3,100 verbs, although many of them have more than one sense. And so there are about 4,000 different senses if you look at them that way. She's classified them into 47 top-level classes and about 150 second and third-level classes. And the way she did this was based on pairs of syntactic frames. So if you take a verb like break, John broke the jar, jars break easily, the jar broke. Okay, these are 3 different ways you can talk about a breaking event. And it could be the same event in all 3 of them. There's nothing really different in what's going on. And these same syntactic frames apply to all of those other verbs in that break class, the smash and split and snap and shatter and so on, can also occur in all of these frames. The jars break easily is called the middle construction because there's only one argument of the verb, just the jar. So it's kind of like an intransitive, but it's got that adverb easily on it, which is sort of indicating that it was easy for some agent to perform this action. It's like there's an agent sort of hovering in the background. Oops, wrong way. So then there's a whole other class of verbs called the cut class. John cut the bread cuts easily. You can still say those 2 things, but you can't say that the bread cut. Okay? And there's just as many verbs in this class as in the break class, and this is one of the things that distinguishes them. And certainly there's an action involved and there's a change of state involved. The bread's undergoing the same kind of change of state that the jar is undergoing, but there's still differences. And then there's a class of verbs, the hit class, and you can say John hit the wall, but you can't say that walls hit easily, and you can't say the wall hit. And this is this kind of information about verbs that caused many linguists to throw their hands up in despair. And people like Maurice Gross in France would say that there is no point in trying to make generalizations about verbs, that each verb is simply individual and independent and has, a different set of syntactic frames from any other verb.
But doesn't he have these finite state machines into which he encodes the verbs?
That's the stuff that
So
Max Silverstein does. But that's not the class information in the finite state things. That's just the.
He's going to use this, 2 different machines if they are really the same. You know what I'm saying? I mean.
Right.
I don't know.
The lexical entry stuff.
Yes.
Anyway.
I'm surprised that
okay.
you say that he really says that. But
yeah.
because I don't think he acts that way.
I don't think he does either, but he does say it. Yeah. So the point. Okay, but Beth was able to find, verbs that patterns similarly. And the point about these patterns is that it's not just arbitrary and it's not just idiosyncratic, that it actually reflects the underlying semantic components. So the reason that you can talk about John breaking the jar, and you can also talk about the jar breaking, is because it's a change of state verb, and what's relevant is that this object is undergoing a change of state. And it's perfectly okay to talk about that change of state with respect to the object without worrying about how it happened. But with hit is a contact verb. And for there to be a contact, there have to be 2 things in contact with each other. So you can't talk about just half of the contact. It doesn't make sense. So you can't use the intransitive. And there's no change of state. So it doesn't make sense to talk about the agent performing something easily, that it was easy for this thing to undergo a change of state, because there is no change of state for it to undergo.
Excuse me, what about the knife? I mean, the knife cut the bread,
right.
The knife cuts easily, knife cut.
This knife cuts easily?
Yeah, isn't it right?
Yeah, you can say that. Yeah,
so,
you could say that.
So it's different because cut is in the, all right, in the 2
well, that's just an instrument.
Positions of bread in some sense, except in the first case it's in the position of John.
Yeah, well, that's just an instrument. Okay, so the instrument can be in the subject position. You probably would say the knife cuts well rather than the knife. I mean, you might prefer that because it's more like it's more like an agent.
And you would hold it against me, would you?
No. You could also say John.
In other words, you insist on the word easily.
It doesn't. It doesn't have to be easily. It could be in a jiffy. It could be with great difficulty. It has to somehow modify the performance of the action.
But the knife cuts it in a jiffy. We could say that.
The knife.
Really
Yeah. No, you can say the knife cuts in a jiffy. You could say John cuts well or John cuts easily. Okay. The thing about the middle is that it has to be the thing that's the patient that's in the subject position for it to be a middle construction. And the reason you can say it here about the cutting is because there's two things involved in the cutting. There's the performance of the action, and it's a sort of directed motion. There's some sort of recognizable directed motion event, and then there's the change of state as well. And you're talking about the bread undergoing a change of state.
Right.
With the bread cuts easily. You could also say John cut at the bread, but the knife was so dull that he wasn't able to get anywhere. And now you're talking about the directed motion event, and you're saying that he's performed enough of a cutting action for you to recognize it as a cutting action, but you don't have the result of the cutting action, which would be the bread being separated into pieces. And that's called the conative, okay, where you have a transitive verb and you stick this at in between the verb and the object. Yeah.
Quite syntactic, there's all the semantics.
Well, yeah. but they're but you can the frames do have recognizable syntactic properties. Okay, so like the conative you can recognize because you take a transitive verb and you stick this at in between the verb and the object. Or the middle, you take what in the transitive form would be the object of the verb, it's in subject position, and it has this adverbial modifier. So I mean, you can, all of these syntactic frames you can define.
But no, but the bread cuts usually as opposed to the knife cuts usually. That's still semantic difference.
You have to accept a classification of instruments as being separate from the objects, the things that undergo the change of state. And it used to be that any kind of semantic class was considered semantic. So even saying that like John is animate, that was considered semantics, right? I mean, I still kind of think of that as semantics. But interestingly enough, syntacticians these days consider that syntactic information because they found it to be so relevant in making a lot of in being able to explain why you can do certain syntactic things and not other things, that they now consider animacy to be a syntactic feature. So who knows, maybe instruments will one day be syntactic features as well. But yeah, the point is that the reason that these verbs pattern like they do and group themselves into these different classes is because they share certain underlying semantic components. Like contact and directed motion and exertion of force and change of state. So these verb classes give us a lot of times synonyms that can be very useful for things like machine translation and cross-linguistic information retrieval and information extraction. They also give us sets of syntactic patterns that are associated with these particular classes, which hopefully we could use these syntactic patterns to recognize new verbs and identify them as also being members of these classes. And they give us information about the underlying semantic relations. So these are great things, right? This is a gold mine. So why, I should be up here giving you a talk about how we're using all this stuff, how we've gotten all these wonderful results using this in our natural language systems. And in fact, one of the first things I wanted to do was take the tree adjoining grammar and define all the tree families around Levine classes. Another thing I wanted to do, I was telling Fred earlier, was to apply clustering algorithms to large amounts of online text and just get these verb classes to kind of arrange themselves into clusters. And it all turned out to be, of course, harder than I thought it would be. One of the reasons was because when we started looking at these Levine classes in more detail, they seemed kind of confusing. For instance, a lot of them aren't very semantically homogeneous. So here's a class, the braid class, which are personal grooming verbs, which have very little in common with each other, apart from the fact that usually a person does them either to themselves or to another person. A hairdresser might braid your hair and clip your nails and so on and so forth. And also there are a lot of verbs that are in more than one class. So draw is in the obtain class, draw water from a well, and it's also in the scribble class, draw a picture. And it turns out that's just, those two senses of draw are homonyms. They really have nothing in common with each other. But then there's a lot of other verbs, like there's all of these verbs right here that are in the push-pull class, which is supposed to take that conative, the at, that I was just talking about. So I could push the table, but I could also push at the table. I could pull the table, but I could also pull at the table and not be able to budge it. So that's fine. But all of these same verbs are in the carry class too, which doesn't take the conative. So is this a contradiction? Are these completely different, unrelated meanings of the words, or what? So one of the things we did was we ran a really very simple algorithm to find all of the verbs that were in more than one class. And we looked in particular at groups of 3 or more verbs that were shared the same class membership. So here are all these same verbs again that are in the push-pull class and the carry class and also in the split class. And then here's a bunch of verbs up here that are in the cut class and that are also in the split class. The reason these have parentheses around them is because they're not listed in the book as being in all 3 of these classes. I think these 2 were not in the carry class, but when we looked at all the syntactic frames and tried to make up sentences, we couldn't see any reason why they couldn't have been in the carry class, and the kick could have been in the push-pull class. So then we started to be able to see what looked like patterns. So if you think of this push-pull sense as being the basic sense of the verb, and there's an exertion of force, and the object is probably, that you're applying this force to, is probably going to move, then you can do an extension of that sense by putting it in the conative, so you can push at the table. And now you're saying definitely that the object didn't move. So this is like an additional piece of information. Or you can add a path prepositional phrase, and I can push the chairs across the room. And now I've got a meaning that's very similar to carry the baby across the room, okay? Where not only do the chairs move, like they might if you just push the chairs, but you go with them. So it's accompanied motion. So I push the chairs across the room, and I also go across the room. So you get that sense by adding on a path prepositional phrase. And then if you take, again, the same basic sense and add an apart, if I push the chairs apart, now I've got a set of chairs, and this is a change of state. I've separated the set of chairs into 2 sets of chairs. So you can take the basic sense, and you can play with it syntactically. You can join on any one of these different syntactic things and get regular extensions of the basic sense. So here are the same sentences again that I was just talking about. If you start with the first one, you've got force and contact, and we'll call John arg0, and we'll call the chair arg1. Okay, and then if you push the chairs apart, you're adding to the force and contact this change of state component. If you push the chairs across the room, now you're adding the change of location component. If you push at the chair, you're saying there's no change of location. And you can do that not just with these push-pull verbs, but you can do that. These are called sound emission verbs. The train whistled, the truck roared. Well, if the train whistled into the station, that train moved, and it came into the station. So now there's the same change of location comes with the path prepositional phrase when it's adjoined onto a sound emission verb as well, or the truck roared past the way station. So what we've done is we've added a 4th level of classes to the Levine classes that are more fine-grained and are more syntactically and semantically coherent. Yeah.
I was just going to say the whistle and roar just seem like special types of sound emission.
Well, can you think of a sound emission verb you can't do that to?
I can't think I sang into the station.
Well, but singing isn't really sound emission, is it? I mean, the same way that. Well, actually, you could say she sang into the room. I mean, meaning someone was singing and, just.
I would imagine that is kind of like singing into the room.
Oh, singing into the room, right. Or but you wouldn't say like if you said she yelled into the room, then you would think she was yelling into the room. But yeah, so I think they are communicative. So sing is more like yell than it is like whistle or roar. I mean, these things, whistle and roar, tend to be sounds that are emitted because of some sort of physical process or mechanical process that is supplying force. And that kind of gives you a context in which, if you add the path prepositional phrase, it's very easy to get the change of location.
Excuse me, just as a matter of interest, if you have this whistle, put the whistle down again. Now, I suppose this is a kind of a poetic.
Yeah, but it gets these are really
So-
common. These are really common. These get used a lot.
Well, historically, I don't know.
Yeah.
Is it possible that historically there was a poet who used it and then?
You mean
know,
that it started as a metaphor?
Or do you think the coal miners or some,
If-
some ordinary people
Well-
started saying whistles into the station? I mean, just
This-
very improbable.
This is such a common occurrence with all of these sound emission verbs that it seems to be more than just one particular verb where someone took a poetic license. When you start looking at all the different senses of a verb, you see a lot of them where you think to yourself, oh, this was really metaphorical.
Yes.
At least initially this was metaphorical, but now it's been kind of frozen and everybody knows. Well, like if you kill a process,
Yes.
you know, I mean, where did that come from? But this particular thing is very productive because it applies to the whole set of verbs. So I think it's a little bit more than just metaphorical.
It seems, to me, it seems that roar is more, shall we say, non-poetic and natural than whistle. But,
Roar. Well, you maybe think of roar as being more closely allied to the engine, the sound that the engine is making when the engine is moving the train. So that might be why it seems more natural. We don't have steam engines anymore. So this seems a little strange. I mean, the train is not whistling a tune. This is really a steam engine, and it just happens to make that whistling sound when it moves. Okay, so the intersected Levine classes seem to be sort of giving us something that's more precise than the original Levine classes. And now we feel like we have something a little more concrete that is going to be easier to work with. And so we are, in fact, sort of building a lexicon. We're using the tree adjoining grammar. We're associating each one of these senses with the specific trees that would be associated with it in the tree adjoining grammar tree families. And we're explicitly associating semantic components with the different senses. And we're also relating them to WordNet senses. So let me say a little bit about another class of verbs, about manner of motion verbs. So here are the different syntactic frames. There's the roll verbs and run verbs. There's like hundreds of manner of motion verbs. But roll verbs can occur in the encodative, in the intransitive, like this, the ball rolled, and again can have this path prepositional phrase, although you probably already had change of location here, even without the path prepositional phrase. And then, or you can, this is called the locative inversion, okay? You can move the same path prepositional phrase to the front. You can say down the hill, rolled the ball. Or you can say Bill rolled the ball. Okay, so now this is the causative, and now it's transitive, and you've got your animate agent here. You could say this is the resultative, the ball rolled free, or here's a measure phrase, the ball rolled 3 feet. Then there's another class of verbs called the run verbs, and they're almost the same, okay? These are all, oh, when I changed the color, I used to have these in different colors. These are all the same except for this one right here and this one down here at the bottom. So here's the same intransitive with the possible locative prepositional phrase, and here it is the locative inversion where you've put it in the front, okay? And here's now you've got your animate agent jumping the horse. Here's your resultative, the horse jumped, but you have to have the reflexive in order to get that. Here's the measure phrase. So the two that are different are pretty innocuous. This one is, you can drop it's called locative drop. Okay, you can drop the locative preposition. And this one, there's a nominalized form, which you can use in a light verb construction to get the same kind of meaning. So it's hard to see how the syntactic patterns for the run verbs are different from the syntactic patterns from the roll verbs. Because other than this, I mean, this is such, how many times are you going to find this if you're doing clustering, you know, even if you've got 30 million words of text? But there's a pretty significant difference between these two classes of verbs. Does anybody want to take a guess? Have you noted that has nothing to do with the syntactic patterns, but has to do with the kinds of arguments?
Between roll and run?
Between the role class and the run class, yeah. Yeah?
The role can take any physical object as an agent where the run is
Right, right, exactly. So the horse is really an agent in itself, okay? So instead of calling this the causative and coative alternation, it's called the induced action alternation. And that's to sort of highlight the fact that when the rider is jumping the horse is still sort of controlling the jumping, but the rider is making the horse do the jump. So we can capture that difference by using a slightly different labeling of the arguments. So if here's the causative with Bill as arg0 and the ball as arg1, then we can reflect that in the encodative with the arg1 here as the subject. And here's our path prepositional phrase, which you can call argp or arg3 or whatever you want to call. Then for the run verbs, let's call the horse arg0, and we'll call this agent that induces the action an arg-a, just to distinguish this class of verbs from the other class of verbs. And then here's, just for fun, these are the intersective. If you look at the manner of motion verbs that are double listed in more than one class, you get this kind of a representation. And well, actually, I have some. We've looked at this in Portuguese too, and there's some kind of interesting things. But I think I don't really have time. I think I'll skip that because there's not really time. There's another. These motion classes turn out to be useful for another machine translation problem, which is the head switching, where you get the log floated into the cave, or in Portuguese, the log entered the cave floatingly, which is the Talmi Romance language figure ground thing, because they allow you to do your transfer lexicon entries for the whole class of verbs rather than having to do each verb individually. And I can give you more details about this if anybody's interested, but I think let me just go on now and say, so given that we are working on VerbNet, and we've got these sort of principled ways of doing the labeling of the arguments in the different syntactic frames, and also of making sense distinctions and being able to see when the sense distinctions are regular extensions of the basic sense, we're looking at using this to sense tag the Penn TreeBank. So let me give you a little bit of background on sense tagging. Of course, WordNet is the publicly available lexical resource, and people have tried to use it for sense tagging. And one of the problems is that there's pretty poor inter-annotator agreement. And if you look at trying to tag sentences with the WordNet census, and I don't know, have any of you tried to do this? You were smiling like maybe you'd spent some time looking at WordNet or no. You can see why you kind of run into problems. If you look at the different meanings for lose, okay, you do have the lose the battle as a separate meaning. Then you've got lose, and you've got lose your glasses when you leave them on the nightstand table as another sense, and that's fine. Then you have a third sense, which starts with she lost her, as the example sentence, she lost her purse when she left it in her car at the football game. And you immediately think, now why is that a different sense from lose your glasses when you left them at the nightstand table? And then you find that there's another example that's paired with, she lost her purse when she left it in the car, is she lost her husband when he died from leukemia. And you go, now wait a minute, what does losing your purse have in common with losing your husband when he died? And it actually took me a while to figure this out, and I finally realized that what the person who did this entry was thinking of was the fact that in that case, in neither case are you likely to ever get the thing or the person back. Okay, if a person has died, we don't expect them to come back, and if you leave your purse in the back of the car at the football game, you're never going to see it again. But obviously, this is bringing in a wealth of world knowledge in order to make that kind of inference, and it's also not even necessary. It's very context dependent. So the thing about the sense distinctions in WordNet is they're not, no one was using consistent criteria with regard to things like, do these senses have different predicate argument structure? Do they have different semantic class constraints? Do they have, is this an abstract usage of, the original concrete meaning of this verb? Are these regular sense extensions of these others? So it's not surprising that you can get a lot of disagreement. We ran a workshop in Brighton called SenseEval, where we wanted to prepare some data to let people train word sense disambiguation systems to see how well they could actually perform on this kind of task. David's did very well. We took 34 words for the English test from something called Hector, which was a joint project between DEC and Oxford University Press, where they had lexicographers use tools provided by DEC and use a lot of corpora to do corpus-based lexicography, so that they actually looked at lots and lots of example sentences before they decided what their sense distinction should be. And then the annotators, the same lexicographers did the annotation of the training data and test data for this project, and they were allowed to go, if they had disagreements, to go back and talk to each other and go back and look at the original entry and see if they wanted to change it. So we got something like 94% inter-annotator agreement. Unfortunately, Hector only has about 200 words, so it's not something we're going to be able to make publicly available. If you look at the differences between Hector and WordNet for a verb like shake, it doesn't look too bad at first glance, okay? You've got 8 sort of major distinctions for the basic verb in either the transitive or the intransitive. And then you have 3 different shake-ups and 3 shake-downs and 2 shake-outs and 2 shake-offs. And WordNet also has 8 major distinctions and 2 shake-ups and 2 shake-offs.
I don't understand what you're saying.
Well,
there are 2 different senses of shake.
Yeah.
On which you can say shake up.
Yeah, right. So there's a total of, what have I got here, 11, 14, like 8. Well, actually, I think they had 23 because they had some idioms as well. So there were about 23 different senses here, and there were about 15 different senses in WordNet. So Hector had more, definitely had more.
Shake off is like shake off fear or something like that, right?
Yeah, or shake the water off the umbrella.
Yeah, and that's totally different.
Yeah, a lot of these.
From the others.
These, yeah. The verb particle constructions are considered, and I think these were all verb particle constructions, usually are different senses.
People don't even notice that it's shake up, or what
Right. Well, this is what happens when you do more corpus-based lexicography. You see all these examples that you didn't think of if you weren't looking at a corpus. But okay, so they're missing a few verb particle constructions, but that's, that wouldn't be that hard to add. But
one more question.
Yeah.
There are these synsets, right?
Yeah.
Do you have a better way of labeling things? I mean, when you say you're going to give it its sense, how do you designate its sense? They have the idea of this synset, right?
Yeah.
What is yours? How do you label it?
I'll show you. Just a second. Some of the synsets are good. The synsets are a lot more problematic for the verbs than they are for the nouns. Anyway, it looks like this isn't too bad, right? WordNet's just missing a few things. But if you look at it in more detail, you realize that the mismatch is a lot more fundamental than just a few missing senses. So this is like shake, the transitive, it could be or intransitive, like the earthquake shook the building, or the boy shook the bag, or you could say the building shook, or the bag shook. And this is the tremble sense, like she shook from fear, which is usually just intransitive. This is shake hands with somebody. This is shake your head. This is shake your fist at someone. Okay, and then these are these verb particle things. Well, all 3 of these mapped to the same sense in WordNet. All 3 of these different kinds of examples were listed under the first sense. And then WordNet also made distinctions between what kind of motion it was. Was it a tremor, or was it a vibration, or was it a swaying motion? And that's what these different senses were. Hector didn't make that kind of distinction. Because again, that's the sort of thing that's going to take world knowledge. You're not going to be able to tell just looking at the sentence what kind of motion it is. So one of the things we're able to do with VerbNet is give a sort of top-level, fairly coarse-grained distinction between the senses, so each sense is associated with a verb class, although all of the senses don't have verb classes, so that's a little misleading if I say they're associated with a verb class. But for shake, we were able to do that. So they're associated with the verb class. They also have specific semantic components that they're associated with, and then a particular kind of syntactic, whatever the syntactic frames are that are relevant. So then all of these verb particle constructions are more specific, are sort of specializations of this kind of sense here. This is the boy shook the bag or the earthquake shook the building. This is the tremble sense. Which in the Levine would be the body internal state verb class in Levine. And then you can, this old past prepositional phrase shows up again. You can shake the apples out of the tree. And now you're actually not shaking the apples. You're literally shaking the tree, and the apples are changing location. Okay, so you've got this past prepositional phrase that's giving you a change of location with a verb that wouldn't normally by itself have a change of location. And just incidentally, you get the same, when you translate these things into Romance languages, you have the same reversal that you get when you translate the motion verbs. So if I want to shake salt over my food, in French I would say something like, I covered my food with salt by using a salt shaker. Just like if you swim across the lake in English, you cross the lake by swimming in French. So the specific manner of the action tends to be a modifier in the Romance languages instead of the matrix verb like it is in English. And then you've got, I thought this was really fun. There's a class of verbs, a Levine class called the crane verbs. Okay, so like you crane your neck or you blink your eyes, and it's a very specific action associated with a specific body part. Well, shaking your head, shaking hands with someone, shaking your fists, those are all very specific actions associated with body parts. Now, they're also all communicative acts. Each one is a gesture that has a specific meaning associated with it. They have different meanings. So these would be different senses, but they're all similar in that the verb class they belong to and in having the communicative act. And you can give a shake of your head, which is the cognate object thing, the noun phrase. And then all the abstract senses, I like to, those are the hardest anyway, so I like to glom them together as much as possible. And we'll just put all those in the psych verb class. And then the idioms, of course, you always have to list those separately. But the multi-word constructions are easy, right? Those are the easiest to find. You just look for all those words together. So now you can take this as the top level thing, and then you could map all of the Hector senses onto this, or you could map the WordNet senses onto this, and then you don't have to worry about the fact that they don't match each other very well. So we're revising WordNet with VerbNet. We're making corpus-based sense distinctions, and we're associating explicit predicate argument structure and constraints with the verb entries, and it's more coarse-grained. And we're using it to sense tag the Penn TreeBank. Ooh, and I need to hurry. Okay, well, this is what the TreeBank already has: part of speech tags, phrase structure bracketing, logical subject, locative, temporal adjuncts. These are the, this is what we're adding to it. We're sense tagging the verbs and the heads of the noun phrases that are the arguments and the adjuncts. And we're also labeling those arguments with these labels, arg0, arg1, arg2. We did it last summer for 5,000 words. We didn't let the annotators talk to each other when they found problems with WordNet. We just took the WordNet census. We had 89% inter-annotator agreement. Of the 700 verb tokens, that was our worst. That was what brought the agreement down. That was 81%. 90 of the 350 the annotators couldn't agree on. So Christiana Feldbaum is working with us now. She's the person who did the verbs for WordNet originally, and we're going back and we're revising all the entries for these 90. Right, we also did the automatic predicate argument labeling. This was done automatically by Rosenzweig's converter, and we got 81% precision. We hand corrected that, the whole 5,000 word thing, which was about 2,000 actual tagged words in a day. So this is the sort of thing we're doing. So I was shaking the whole time, arg0, WordNet sense 2, that is a temporal adjunct. The wall shook, this is arg1 because it was the patient. WordNet sense 3, the building rock, is the same kind of thing. So this is the Rosenzweig's converter that does the automatic labeling, uses TreeBank cues as much as possible, and it has a lexical semantic knowledge base which has all the information from the Levine classes and also from the tree adjoining grammar syntactic frames and the list of multi-word lexical items. So it basically has a bunch of templates which it tries to match to a particular TreeBank structure. So there is a TreeBank structure that has rate as the main verb that matches this kind of a tree. And then once it matches, he's able to put these labels on because he knows that this particular structure is the RAID sense in Levine class 35.4, and this is what the argument structure for that Levine class is. So now we're doing 150,000 words with 2 human annotators. And when we have enough examples of a particular sense, we're going to try to use automatic word sense disambiguation and do the predicate argument labeling. And I really should stop, so I'll just say, I'll skip all this and just say that we're doing a Korean TreeBank. We have a 50,000 word parallel corpus, Korean and English, from the Army. And so we're doing a Korean TreeBank for the Korean side, and we've parsed the English side, and we're hand correcting that. And we're doing the same kind of predicate argument structure. We don't have as much detail in our Korean lexicon as we have in the English lexicon, but hopefully we'll add more to that. And well, I was going to give you examples of the transfer lexicon. And we're also doing a Chinese TreeBank. We have 100,000 words of Chinese newswire from Beijing. And that's done, actually. We've just finished the second pass. So if anybody wants it, we're going to be releasing it to the people who are involved in TIDES, which I think you guys are sort of a subcontractor to Maryland, aren't you? Or TIDES? Yeah, right. Oh, wait, there's the Chinese TreeBank stuff. So there's the Chinese TreeBank. Right.
You gave it the attention you deserve.
Yeah, well, hey, I mean, don't ask me any questions. And what we're going to do, we had some discussion about this in TIDES. I think what we're going to do is just translate that Chinese text into English, have it professionally translated, and then TreeBank that as well. So our idea is that if we can give all you statistical gurus this parallel annotated corpora, that you'll be able to do wonderful things with it. So.
But we will see whether Dekaibu is right, you know, about this. The Chinese is like English, except.
Oh, but it is. Yeah, we've got a paper. Remember, I was telling you how we extracted an English tree adjoining grammar from the English TreeBank?
Yes.
We've done the same thing with the Chinese TreeBank. There's 80% overlap between. Well, actually, not between. It's not that 80% of the trees are the same. It's a much smaller percentage of the trees are the same, but those trees account for 80% of the data.
No, but that's not the theory. The theory is that it's like a modium. That you know the branches that come here down in Chinese might be permuted.
Well, some of them are.
The same.
Yeah, some of them are. Some of the modifiers are on the left side instead of the right
exactly
side.
Right.
Some of the preposition things are on the right side instead of the. Yeah, whatever. Yeah, that's true. But the basic structure is actually very similar. Okay, thank you.
So can it work like this, N?
Excuse me?
No, this is a serious question.
What did you say?
Well, I mean, it is like atoms, right? And under atoms are electrons, and under electrons are whatever. You know, and if you're a physicist, it just never ends, right? I mean,
Oh, can this end? That was your question?
Particles. Right.
Why can't I get rid of this? There we go. Can this end?
I'm not trying to.
I think no. I think. Why does that keep doing that?
That will work, right.
It's, you know what it's doing? It's changing the size every time I do this. Function F8, Alt F8. Here, okay, thank you. I think each sense of each word, maybe not as fine-grained as WordNet, but we'll say at a more coarse-grained level, each sense of each word is going to need its own little transducer. I think that's right. And there's some of the words are very well behaved in terms of the types of arguments they take, and that you can really give them any argument in a particular semantic class. But a lot of the words are much more selective than that. Like, for instance, This is one of Patrick Hanks's favorite examples. He was the,
I know that.
okay,
Maybe
that,
they don't, so you should tell them.
huh?
Maybe they don't.
Okay,
but-
Patrick Hanks is a lexicographer who was involved in the Hector Project. He was the head of the lexicography at Collins when they did, which dictionary? CoBild, the CoBild dictionary, yeah. And he's been at Oxford University Press since then. He's going to be at Penn for a couple months in the fall. So that you would like to be able to say that shake, you look at shake your head, shake hands, shake a fist, shake your finger, body parts. You can shake a body part. And it's true, you can. You could also shake your leg, you could shake your arm, but those have completely different meanings. And the ones that are the communicative acts are a very restricted set of, I think, just 4, maybe 5, depending on what your language is. And so you really have to be able to list each one of those separately. You can't just say the semantic class constraint on this argument position is any body part. And that's true of a lot of words.
So what do you think? I mean, what is the multiplier? I mean, if we take words alphabetically and there is, I don't know, 100,000.
Well, the verbs. This is.
Are they going to be 700,000 from 100,000 or what?
No. This is verbs. I'm talking about verbs. Okay, so there's 4,000 verbs in Levine. There's maybe 7,000 that you would need. There's like a 3,000 she didn't bother with, and the ones she did bother with, they have several senses. But I don't like. Well, and then there's all those verb particle constructions. If we said an average of 10
per verb.
Say 10, yeah, out of say 7,000, 7 to 10,000, that's 100,000.
And what's the situation with newly minted verbs? I mean,
That's the biggest problem.
Do they then have a unique meaning, or do they in fact immediately start moving?
That's the biggest problem. When we were doing break, when we were doing all the Brown corpus stuff, we were also doing smash. And of course, there's a sense of smash, which is very like break, and you can smash your car, you could smash the vase or whatever. And then we found the sentence that said, where these two guys were having a fight, and with all the force he had at his disposal, he took his right fist and smashed at his opponent's face. Smashed at his opponent's face, okay? And I don't think I had ever seen smash used like that before. But you know immediately what it means, right? The face didn't shatter into lots of different pieces. He hit at his opponent's face. So it was taking smash and using it in a hit sense instead of in a break sense. But nobody has any trouble, hopefully, figuring that out.
Smash,
right.
And that doesn't
Smash
shatter
the.
anything, right?
Yeah, and that's the hit sense, right? So yeah, so I should have. It's not that unusual. I should have seen it in tennis. Maybe I had, and I'd forgotten about it. Okay, but what's interesting is how do you, if you hadn't seen it before, how would the computer, if the computer only knew the break sense, how would it do that? That's one of the reasons that I'm so interested in the Levine classes, because I think the syntactic frame is a very important clue. And there aren't that many verb classes that let you, that's this connotative thing again, where you put the at in between the verb and the object, although here it's more a sort of directional meaning than a, and of the verbs that involve exertion of force, like break does, and like push, pull does, and grasp, well, no, not grasp. The hit class is the only one that can take the connotative and involves exertion of force that has the same aspect as break. It's a punctual event rather than a process. So, maybe you would guess, if you took all of that into consideration, that it would be a sense more like the hit at than anything else. But until we can get a good enough handle on these classifications and what the semantic components are and exactly what syntactic frames are involved, we're not ever going to be able to do something like that.
Well, I think you hit a good point, because with the idea of smash and face, that really depends on the actions that face can take. So I mean, we know that the face didn't break up.
Right, that's true. That's a good point too. Yeah.
So presume we'll be having a noun next or something like that.
Yeah. Well, you do. Well, we're using right now. We're trying to just use the the noun classes in WordNet as much as possible. And although those probably need to be augmented some. So you certainly, something that's going to break into pieces needs to be in some sense brittle. It has to be, or rigid, or it has to have some sort of property associated with it that would be different from a face in order to do that. And actually, I don't think WordNet would have that particular kind of property.
So the answer to my labeling question is that you simply say WordNet 3.
Oh, yeah, we're calling it, what are we calling it? I think we're calling it WordNet 1.7.
Well, okay. I asked you how you replace
The synonym sets?
yes, synonym sets. And the way I see is that you simply give them a number. That's the third sense of the word play.
Yeah. Well, those
That's
are.
not very good, right? I mean, I don't know what to do, but.
Well, I was giving them a number.
It's terrible because it's got all these words.
Yeah. They have a number. They also have a position in a classification scheme. You know, they're like in a particular
no, but
class.
when you write it with this labeling,
oh, those I was just.
Can conceivably figure out.
Right. Yeah, those we were just using. Well, WordNet has, this string, a unique string, a set of numbers associated with each sense set. So that's what we were using. But there's kind of a problem too with WordNet because George won't let us revise very many of the entries because he's already used them to do some tagging. So at the moment we're just doing all this like a layer on top of WordNet, which maybe is okay to do it like that.